welcome. I know it's really sunny in London, so thank you for taking the time to join us today. A few housekeeping rules before we begin. Please keep your mics muted, and any technical questions or issues that you may have, please plug it into the chat box below. Any questions that you have throughout the talk, please plug it into the Q&A box. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so please plug those in there. This video is being recorded, and we do have a hashtag for today's event and for the hackathon. So that's hashtag IOIThack, hashtag IOIThack. So use that for your social media and any takeaway messages, home messages that you may have today. So thank you for joining. I'm Mariam, co-founder and director of Enteromics, a medtech startup that builds smart gut sensing pills. And alongside my role at Enteromics, I research biocrime, the Internet of Medical Things, and cyber biosecurity as part of my PhD studies at UCL, with the aim to inform evidence-based policymaking regarding biocrime. And as part of this, I'm running the Internet-Of-Ingestible-Things hackathon, which is a series of workshops that brings together experts from cybersecurity and the medical device industry to really help design security for the Internet of Ingestible Things. So ingestible things are internet-connected ingestible medical devices such as smart gut sensing pills. So in terms of our hackathon, registration is now closed, and I'm happy to announce that we have 7 groups that are currently halfway through their application process for a chance to go through into our hackathon next month in May. The top 3 teams will be selected. If you'd like any further information, I've just plugged in a link in the chat for you to follow and have a look. So the hackathon has a cash prize for the winner, which is sponsored by the DOS Center for Future Crime, which aims to really answer key questions such as which emerging crimes should we focus on given limited resources, and how can we mitigate future threats. So as a prelude to the hackathon, we have a series of talks which really explore the prospects and challenges of the ingestible things. And so far, we've learned about future crime, why the gut microbiome is at the center of our health, the significance of patient-centric design of medical devices, and that security is really at the center of innovation and a business enabler. Today's talk has a structure of a 20-minute talk with a 15-minute QA session right after. And 8th in our series, we have Ed, who is the Chief Medical Officer for BioBright, a Boston-based software company active in scientific informatics and digital biosecurity. He graduated from MIT and completed his MD at the Duke University School of Medicine. And as a clinical informatist, technologist, and physician leader, he has served within independent community hospitals, multi-hospital networks, startups, and technology firms. He also remains clinically active as a pediatric hospitalist. So now at BioBright, he works at the intersection of the biological sciences and healthcare, really collaborating in the biomanufacturing space with healthcare equipment and manufacturers. So enough from me, over to you, Ed.
Thanks, Mariam. So I'm super excited about this talk. First of all, I'm glad it's good weather over in London. It's Patriots Day over here in Boston. Patriots Day is a funny holiday. It sort of celebrates the beginning of the American Revolution here, but it's a weird holiday in that it's only recognized, I think, in Massachusetts and in Maine. So if you're one lucky few people here in the country to get it off, happy Patriots Day. So thanks for inviting me. I'm excited about this. I'm super psyched about the whole IOIT hackathon in general because there's been a focus on security here, and I just want to take a moment before I start talking about how great this is. You know, people coming in from on the device side, coming in from healthcare, coming from design. Oftentimes, there's not thought to security, but for better or for worse, we live in a world now where it has to there has to be a focus there. And so I think it's really cool and really forward-thinking of IOIT to actually be putting together security talks to inform people who are getting into this, because like I said, it's necessary now, it's only going to be more necessary going forward. will attack. So the idea today is to introduce people, sort of a 101 high-level introduction to thinking about medical device security or device security in general from a red team kind of mindset. The idea, again, is a lot of us come into these hackathons, come into medical device design from the medical side or from the biological side, if you're doing those kind of devices, or you come in from the device side. Our expertise in general is not in security. It's not what we do. It's not how we've been trained. It's not how we're trained to think. But again, for better, for worse, we're in a world now where we have to start thinking about these things. This is a big part of design that has to be present going forward, just because all of the threats out there. We're going to talk about that. All right, so why should I care? Why should I, as a medical device designer, someone who's entering this hackathon, care about device security? So me, I'm a physician, like Mariam was saying. You know, I'm a doctor. I'm not a security engineer. So why should I have to care about this stuff? Security is a pain. It's really expensive. You need specialized knowledge there. You need to hire consultants, or you need to bring in people on the team to think about security. It intrudes on usability. You know, we all know, all those of us who are in the medical industry, we know that security, we stumble on this all the time, even just having to deal with multiple passwords, tap and go systems, whatever authentication we have to build into the system. It does intrude on usability. So, you know, why do I want to put that handicap on my system, on my device as I design it? Secondly, again, this is not my area of expertise. This is not what I was trained to do. My core competency, whatever is in medical device design, or it's in the use case that's out there. You know, I'm trying to improve gut microbiomes or whatever. I'm not a security engineer. And lastly, why can't I just do this later? You know, I'm this little startup. I'm just trying to get off the ground. Let me do this later when I'm bigger, when I have more money, more staff, and I'm better funded. It just doesn't make sense for me to do this now. There's a lot of excuses not to do this. Flip side of that is that attackers are a legion. There are tons and tons and tons of attackers out there. Just in the hospital world, which I follow pretty closely, there have been 92 ransomware hacks in 2020, affecting a total of about 600 organizations. This is clinics, this is hospitals, this is freestanding labs. This is just in the medical world. There's been 600 of these organizations affected, and something like 150 million individual medical records have been affected by this. And so these are nation states, these are hacker groups. These are also random people just sitting around and trying to do this for whatever reason. In addition to hacks on hospital systems, there's been attacks on public schools. There's been attacks on utilities. Just in the States, in the last couple of months, we've now learned that there have been 2 attacks on water distribution utilities. And I don't know why you want to do this, but these folks were just tampering with water supply. So bottom line there is that attackers are everywhere. There's tons of them. Anyone who has a computer sitting on the internet, has access to resources, can become an attacker. Item number 2, they're capable enough. Just due to proliferation of tools, of hacking tools out there that hasn't been met with the sort of the same level of sophistication and level of tool availability on the defense side. There's a lot of stuff that, you know, relatively unseasoned, untrained hackers can get to that they can leverage into to great effect. And number 3, attackers are jerks, not to put too fine a point on it. These folks are attacking basically whatever they can get their hands on. And it doesn't matter if it's a soft target. We saw there's a little bit of a downtick at the start of pandemic time, just because there's sort of a gentleman's agreement among hackers say, hey, we're not going to attack hospitals and healthcare targets just because you know, it's a rough time with COVID. Well, that has been off. That sort of truce has been off for the last 6 months. And again, these folks are attacking, in addition to hospitals, they're attacking schools. I mean, these aren't military installations. These aren't banks or something like that that you want to steal a lot of money from. These are really soft public targets. They're attacking water utilities, anybody. These guys are just, honestly, they're jerks. They have no scruples about who they're attacking and what effects these things are going to have. Next point here, consumers and end users are actually increasingly starting to demand more device security. They're getting more aware of the issues around security, and they're starting to ask questions, you know, when they see devices. Hey, you know, what security measures are built into this? I know that in the positions that I've sat in as within medical systems that are looking at devices to bring into the system, a set question that we have to ask all the time is, is this secure? What safeguards do you have against someone using this to ill ends, or using this as a means to get into my network? And so consumers and users are getting a lot more savvy and looking at this. And then the last point here, baking security in from the start is just a lot cheaper, a lot easier than doing it down the line. Sure, it's a bit of a lift on the front end, but it's 100 times easier doing it early on when you have more control, devices are already out in the wild, you don't have software out in the wild, than going back after the fact and saying, oh, we have to do a recall, or we have to find some way to roll some kind of hardware update or software update out to all our devices out there over the air or manually. It's just, do it now. It's painful now, but it's worth it down the road. An ounce of prevention is a pound of cure, as we love to say. So what do we as medical device designers need to do is think like a red team. Now, for those of you folks who are familiar with sort of red team, blue team methodology or ways of thinking, you can sort of tune out of this. But those, like many of us who aren't, the idea is that the red team is sort of like the attacking team, and the blue team are the people on defense out there. Red team is sort of the not necessarily bad guys. You can have red teams within an organization that are trying to do sort of ethical hacking. But the idea is that the red team are sort of the attackers, blue team are defenders. And so what your job is, even if you're not a security engineer, even if you're a biologist, even if you're a physician, even if you're just a device designer, is you have to think like a red team. Learn to think like a red team in what you do, because there's people out there who are thinking like red teams, and we'll be out there trying to figure out how to compromise your device. And so we all need to be able to put on a red team's hat as we do our design, as we develop our software, as we develop our workflows, and say, okay, this is the goal we have for the purpose of this device, but we also need to think, how can this be twisted? How can this be used to, again, ill intent? So this is my overly simple device hacking model that I like to talk to people about. I like to introduce the whole red team concept with. So we have sort of three areas of thought. Is a device accessible? Number one. Number two, is an attack on it going to be impactful? And number three, is that attack then scalable and or extensible? And let me talk about this in a little more detail. So when I say accessible, I mean, can someone get access to the device to do something to it? Notice I don't say attackable here, because basically once you have access to a device, for all intents and purposes, any device is attackable. The question is, can you get access to it? So that could be physical access, that could be network access if you're plugged in and has some connectivity there. Over in the red, impactful. So the second circle with impactful, the idea is if I do something, if there's an attack, is there actually something meaningful that happens as a result? It's not going to matter if I change the color that an LED glows, perhaps, but if I can cause a battery to blow up, or I can cause patient data to be leaked, that's more impactful. So accessible, impactful. Next is scalable and or extensible. So if I do an attack, and whether or not it has impact, can I repeat that attack down the line with other devices? Is it something that's easily replicable? And or is it something that I can extend? So if I get access to that device, can I use that to then get access to other devices, other computers, other networks, and sort of extend the reach of my attack? So these are sort of three areas that you want to think about when you think about your device and its availability to hackers. The high value stuff, the high value targets that red teams are going to be most interested in, obviously, lies at the intersection of those three circles. Is it those things that are accessible, impactful, and scalable? That said, I don't want you to ignore the things that are only hit by two of these circles too, because those areas are still very interesting. Classic example here. You guys have probably heard about the Medtronic wireless vulnerability that affected their implantable cardiac defibrillators. So this is a great example of something that is not scalable or extensible, because you need individual access to that defibrillator, but it's highly impactful. So you have an item that's accessible and impactful, and in fact, it led Dick Cheney, who was the VP, Vice President of the United States under George W. Bush, to actually deactivate the wireless capabilities of his defibrillator because he thought it was a credible enough threat. So accessible, highly impactful, not scalable, but still interesting enough that you need to do something about it. So focus on the high value targets, but don't forget about the really interesting areas that still exist. So what I want to do to sort of reinforce the exercise and this sort of way of thinking like a red team is actually do a nice walkthrough through 2 example devices that are actually ingestible and potentially vulnerable. And we'll talk about that too. But first, a couple caveats. One is don't do this. Don't do any of the attacks we talk about here. Second disclaimer is that none of these devices, none of these vulnerabilities we're going to talk about, I should say, none of these vulnerabilities have been tested personally by me or my team. And that all the information that we're going to talk about here is actually all open source information that's available just on the internet. So no, crazy secret information here. These are just high level ideas to illustrate the concept. That said, don't go pursuing these things. So first item here, we have a pill cam. We're going to call it the Ed cam. This is a ingestible pill size camera that is used for doing what have you, scopes of your upper GI tract, your small intestine, large intestine. You swallow it, it takes images every so often. Those images are transferred wirelessly to a receiving sensor, and then processed on a computer. So let's walk through our sort of Venn diagram on this. So is this device accessible? Something like this is likely accessible before your procedure only. It's hard to get to, obviously, once you swallow it. But so your accessibility, your physical accessibility is likely going to be limited to just before that person does the procedure, before that person ingests it. One question you want to ask yourself about this device is, does it have any receiving capability? Can it receive commands? Can it receive data? Because that would imply another level of accessibility beyond just the physical accessibility. I don't know the answer to that, but that's something that you want to ask as a red team and as a designer. Number 2, is it impactful? Is there a attack that I could pull off on this that would be impactful? And here it's sort of arguable, like, could I steal the pictures off this device? Could I intercept the pictures from this device? Yeah, great, maybe. If you do, is that going to be impactful? Again, maybe. Are you going to become a GI paparazzi and start selling pictures in the National Enquirer of some celebrities, GI tract? Okay, great. Maybe not the most impactful thing in the world. And then the last point here around the camera, is an attack going to be scalable or extensible? Again, unlikely, just because you probably need physical access to this camera to do something to it. And so that require you to, as an attacker, physically go from camera to camera to camera, or go from clinic to clinic. Not a thing that's going to scale out on a large scale. But, and here's a big but, we need to think about not just the device in question. We don't want to think, in this case, just about the camera. You want to think about the whole environment around the camera as well, the whole device environment around that. In this case, in the case of the Ed cam, as I mentioned, you have a sensor belt, which you see there sort of on the bottom left. This is an item that receives the wireless picture transmission from the camera. You also have a receiving device, which is that sort of funny Palm Pilot-like thing that actually takes the images from the sensor belt. And in addition, you have a computer that this is all attached to that processes the images, attaches it to a medical record, whatnot. Now, all of a sudden, you have more devices. You have a lot larger attack footprint. And so now, in terms of accessibility, you have to ask yourself a lot more questions. So, for example, is there authentication or matching between your camera and your sensor or your receiver? How do you know? How does the camera know that the sensor that's receiving these images is a legit sensor, is where it wants to go? Is it validated? Is there some kind of handshake that happens? Some recognition that happens authentication that happens between those two devices? Can I spoof a sensor? Could I either remotely or just mail something that looks like a sensor belt to a clinic and say, hey, this is a sensor, and then use that to acquire data that I shouldn't have? And then also software. You're using software to process these images. You're using software to view these images and put them in the electronic medical record, Is that software itself accessible? Is that software supply chain accessible? So again, you have to think about the whole environment around the device, the things that it attaches to, the software that works with that device, and how that software is delivered. All that is the whole environment we're talking about. And so when you're talking about accessibility, you're talking about hackability, you need to look at all those things. So those computers that are processing these images, they're sitting most likely inside a hospital, inside a protected network already. So as such, that's going to become a much more interesting target for hackers because it allows them an easy port of entry inside a hospital's internal network. So again, these are the reasons you have to think about the whole sort of reach of a device and its environment, and what impact that might have on its attackability and attractiveness to attackers. Going down the list here, is this impactful? Here, yes. National Enquirer may not care about your pictures of someone's colon, but if you can compromise a computer through a supply chain hack, a software supply chain hack, and that computer lies inside a hospital network, you have access to all those hospital medical records, which is the reason why all these hospitals are being attacked by ransomware people, ransomware hackers all the time. So is it impactful? Yes. Is it scalable, extensible? Yes. Again, you're inside a network now. You can move laterally. The extensibility is much higher. The scalability is much higher. So again, not to belabor the point, when you're talking about a device, you have to think about the whole device environment because the favorability of attack, the accessibility to attack is going to change a lot, most likely, when you look at everything that device connects to and needs to operate. Let's talk about another device here. This is a Enteromics swallowable drug dispensing pill. All right, this is a pill. I think this one is, I want to say 9 by 25 millimeters, but it contains about 1/4 ml of drug, and as well as a pH sensor that tells it where it sits in the GI tract. You swallow it, and it's programmable, and you can communicate with it as well. And when it's in a certain part of the GI tract, it says, hey, my pH is at this level. That tells me I'm in the place I want to be. I'm going to dispense this amount of drug, or I'm going to dispense it slowly over the course of the entire GI tract. Use this to treat Crohn's, use this to what have you. Nice little device. Let's walk down the red team sort of mantra here. Is this accessible? Again, likely before the procedure only when looking at just the device. Is it impactful? Here, maybe a bit more than the EdCam was. Here, you have the opportunity to dispense perhaps too much drug at once, which could be a problem depending on what drug you have. This has a bunch of batteries in it. Can you do something with the battery to make the battery overload? This actually has to be, this has to have a decent amount of battery to stay alive in the entire amount of time it has to traverse the gut. And so there's a decent amount of charge in there. And as you can see from actually the pictures I introduced there, I put these on there because batteries are near and dear to me. Battery ingestions are near and dear to me as a pediatrician because they happen all too frequently. And you can see the damage that a single CR2032 battery does to, in this case, the GI proxy, which is a slice of lunch meat. Basically, they take the battery, fold the lunch meat over it, and that's pretty quickly the kind of damage it can do to the lining. So at any rate, PSA over, bottom line is that battery overload can be an issue in the GI tract as well. Scalable, extensible, just like the last thing, if you only have access to it before the procedure, it's going to be a hard thing to scale up and make impact a lot of different people. But again, we have a system, we have an environment around this device. In this case, we have a laptop computer, which has a USB connected sort of device interface that you can use to program the device. There's also, I didn't put the picture there, but there's also a sensor belt as well that communicates with this device. We know from open source material that you can deliver commands to this device. You can tell it when to deliver drug, you can tell it how much to deliver. And so there's much more opportunity now for much more attack surface area when you have something that isn't just sort of passively going through the gut, sort of agnostic to what's going on, what communications are going on to it. Here you have something that's responsive, and so you have much more opportunity to do harm. Questions you have for yourself when you're looking at the environment. Is there authentication again between the device and the receiver? How does that pill dispenser know that the signals it's getting from the outside are authentic, that you're getting it from a trusted source? Again, can you spoof any component in there? You can see in the picture next to the computer, hopefully, that there's a little USB drive there. And like anytime you as a Red Hat person see a USB drive like that, you just like rub your hands, because this is like all, easy way to get stuff in there. And again, anytime you have software, you have a supply chain for that software. And that software supply chain is as vulnerable as any other software supply chain. And we know all about the kind of hacks that can happen through that, witness SolarWinds just recently. So accessibility expands a lot, again, when you're looking at that whole environment. So I'm going to hammer it home. Look at the whole environment around your device. What connects to it? What software is used around it? Are the attacks impactful? Again, yes, for secondary targets, and in this case, primary targets too, if we're talking about the stuff we were talking about in the previous slide. Once you're in that network, you can do a lot of damage. Leaking personal health information, causing access to things that can be locked down you don't want to be locked down. So certainly high potential for impact there. And lastly, is it scalable and extensible? Again, once you're on a computer, once you're in a network, you have much more ability to scale and to extend. So again, if you focus on just the core device, that pill, that thing that gets swallowed, you're not going to appreciate the whole panoply of attack surface and impact and scalability that's available there. So when you think as a red team, and again, you have to think like this because the real red teams out there are thinking like this. You have to think about everything that device interacts with. So takeaways, number one, security, yes, it's a pain. But, to quote Princess Bride, life is pain. This is something you have to do now, for better or for worse, for your product, for your patients, for your investors, for your end users. They care. Hospitals, health systems are paying cyber insurance now because the risk of cyber attack is high enough that they have to worry about this stuff. And so that's trickling down to the end users, to the people who are going to be using your devices, or at least buying your devices. And they're saying, look, we have to worry about security on this stuff. And so if your patients can be impacted, your end users are concerned about this, or asking about security, you have to worry about it too. You have to worry about it up front. Number two, like I said, think like a red team. Think like a jerk, in so many words. Nothing is sacred. Water supplies aren't sacred. Power grids aren't sacred. Hospitals aren't sacred. We just saw back in January, the European Medicines Agency was hacked, and the vaccine trial data was stolen, and it was posted to the internet, but not before the trial data was actually tampered with to make it look like the vaccines were less effective. So these are first-class jerks out there who are doing this stuff. They have no scruples, no qualms about hurting people in their quest for, whether it's political influence, making a country look bad, making a health system look bad, or just plain money. So, through your efforts at securing your device, you're defending all these vulnerable targets. You're helping defend all these vulnerable targets. And it's not just about your device, remember, it's about the whole environment around it, which is the last point there. Think about everything your device attaches to, every bit of software your device uses, all the workflows that go in there. So I put the MEDoc logo there. For those of you who are sort of follow cybersecurity at all, you might recognize that name. So MEDoc is the name of a software package used in Ukraine. It's a accounting package, actually. And it turns out that MEDoc was the backdoor that NotPetya used to get into Maersk, the giant shipping company, and caused $10 billion worth of damage. It came in through one computer, one installation of MEDoc. This is Ukrainian accounting software, right? This isn't financial software. This isn't something that you would say is a great target for hackers, but yet it caused $10 billion in damage, and probably the biggest and the most expensive, I should say, hack that's occurred to date. So, obscurity is not a defense. These folks have no scruples. They'll use any way possible to get in to the networks they want to get into, and that can be through your device. So we need to be vigilant for everyone. And that is it. And I will open up to questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Ed. I absolutely love the examples, the Ed Cam and the Ed Medics.
Yes.
Absolutely love those.
We're trying not to out anybody here, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I loved, I certainly learned a lot in terms of the take away home message, that we can't just focus on the single device, right? It's about the environment, the network.
Yes.
Um, and that is what creates this larger kind of attack footprint. Now, I'll warm up the Q&A sessions by asking a question myself, actually. So from the examples that you gave, these are kind of already existing or already commercialized capsule technologies,
Yes.
currently used by clinicians. But I kind of want to take, I want us to put our futures hat on in terms of emerging ingestible technology, especially now as the participants of the hackathon are kind of putting their ideation hats on,
Yes.
and moving towards capsules that, and you did prelude to it, not only kind of take pictures, but might be able to receive information or collect data about biomarkers, let's say in the gastrointestinal tract. Talk to us about about the attack surface there, and what are your predictions on certain biocrimes? And likewise, is there a security specific to ingestible devices that we will need to apply? Talk to us through this landscape.
Yeah, sure. So great question. So you mentioned yourself sort of the difference between the first example and the second example. The first example being sort of a passive device. It doesn't really take commands from the outside. It just delivers information that it sees. There's less surface to attack than a device like a second device, where actually you can receive commands. You can receive information from the outside, directions from the outside. And so that that should be obvious there, that, hey, this is something that you need to be more vigilant around otherwise. And the more capabilities your device has to do things, the more instructions it's going to require, the more manipulation that's possible, the more, unfortunately, for better or for worse, the more nefariousness that can happen. And so again, it's important there to think about what could go wrong. If I were a jerk, if I wanted to hurt somebody, what could I do with this device and how would I do it? And so this is where it becomes very important to make sure that there's authentication between people on the outside and the device on the inside. How does the device know that the command it's getting is legit? If it's from a trusted source, it's from the sensor or the communication array that is supposed to be communicating with it. And so that's a new, again, the more complex your device, the more hardened that connection has to be. To talk about your second question around biocrime, again, I think to go back to the whole Venn diagram here, it needs to be a case where something is accessible, which it may be more just because of the ability to receive commands, but then impactful, right? Your biocrime is less interesting if you're maybe just tweaking someone's microbiome, as opposed to delivering potent drugs to the GI tract, just to give an example. So the potential there is just really around the impact, whether that's high or low, depending on what your application is. And so I can only speculate there what that might be.
Yeah.
We see the stuff around drug delivery, and so it's easy to see where that could be an issue there. But I don't know what your folks are going to hook up. Which is why it's important for me to spread this sort of mindset to all the people who are thinking these ideas, because I can't look at every idea and say, oh, these are vulnerabilities. It's up to you all, the people who are developing ideas yourselves, to say, yes, I'm developing this idea, but I also need to make sure I think about it from a security standpoint, from a vulnerability standpoint.
Which so far, yeah, this is a very good point, because so far we kind of depended on, as you said, the security engineer, and that's
right.
kind of their problem. I'm going to build my beautiful device, and I'm going to focus on my innovation, and then especially for medical devices, I get to the point where I need to, let's say, get it certified for it to get into the market, and I attend to security only as a compliance check, as a risk assessment, rather than
Yes.
actually investing time and thought in alternative uses and misuses included of that device that I'm designing. So I do really like to highlight this kind of mentality shift, and I hope that also comes out through this hackathon. Uh, I- in thinking about these roles and potentially a more multidisciplinary kind of collaborative effort and shift in mindset, um, how do you see, so do you see the inventor going through these kind of red team exercises at ideation stage? Do you see multidisciplinary teams working on a medical device with different expertise, all the way to do you believe that there will be some sort of framework, kind of like, and I want to discuss an example after I let you actually answer the question, of kind of open, a similar API that we have in kind of applications and other types of devices? Is that possible to be applied in things like medical devices, which,
Yes.
undergo stringent safety regulation, et cetera?
Yes, so good thought. I think the answer is going to be yes to all those things, honestly. I think we're at a stage, for better or for worse, again, with medical device security, it's still sort of I don't want to say nascent, but it's early. Just the awareness around this is still pretty early, that you can get up to speed on sort of just basic medical device security concepts pretty quickly. And so it's totally within the realm of possibility for an inventor to be reasonably competent, to have at least a high level, comfort with the kind of stuff to think about, using frameworks like the simple one I talked about today, even. So that's completely legit, and that should be there. And again, I applaud you for including this idea as part of design of these things, security in general. At the same time, device security or security in general is certainly a growing field, and so there will be, security expertise coming up through the ranks. And available, for teams who are doing a more in-depth, more dedicated look at this. Certainly, it's a great career path for people who are interested. And as technology penetrates more and more into different areas, into biology, into medicine, into self-care, the need for security is going to trickle into all of these just at the same time. And so the need for people who understand security and then understand the use cases as well, that's just also going to grow. So it's a great time to be a security, someone who's interested in security and coming up in the ranks there. And as for standards, frameworks, I want to be optimistic and say that there is going to be something there. I would really like for there to be something there, but I have to be realistic too, and say that I know, speaking from the biomanufacturing standpoint, which is another industry I know pretty well, biological data that comes from laboratory instruments. This could be like mass spec data or stuff from plate readers, chemistry analyzers, what have you. This is stuff that has been around for a while now, comparatively speaking, relative to medical device data, and isn't sort of as diverse necessarily as medical device data is, but yet still doesn't have good security framework around it. Security is still, even in relatively mature industries, seen as a cost center. And so it's like you say, it's a checkbox. It's farmed out to the lowest bidder, oftentimes in countries that you don't necessarily want to be dealing with a lot, like Eastern European countries. You don't want them necessarily handling your security. But that's changing by necessity. Just we've seen it already in the last year. The momentum is shifting a lot more interested in security there. But to date, there still isn't a good framework for like a biology startup or someone with a new instrument to say, hey, I want to adhere to these security standards, this security framework, this secure file format. There's basic stuff like GMP, GXP, there's SOC 2 standards, but these are all self-reported compliance audits, essentially. You go down, you check the boxes. There's not, red teaming involved. There's not a concerted look at design, workflows involved, and So while I would like to think that security will rise to the level of there being a standardized framework for it, I can't say I'm optimistic about it.
Yeah. No, I like the balance of realism there. Because what I wanted to discuss, I don't know if you've heard of it, but have you heard of the case of the loopers?
No, do tell.
So basically a selection of patients that ended up hacking their own medical device, their insulin pump, so that it would basically tailor to their needs. So it's a continuous glucose monitoring device that they've actually tweaked so that they would get, their doses in the correct times and kind of automated.
Great.
And the reason why I mention this is because it's a unique example where hacking in this case is kind of positive. And the reason why I wanted to kind of speak about it is, although we're realistic about, a universal structure or framework not being possible, is it possible that, or in the future, do we see medical device manufacturers and designers having to, let's say, design some sort of, how should I call it, sandbox, or like an API for medical? Do you see that come? What are your predictions?
I would love for that. I think so. So continuous glucose monitoring is an interesting example because that community has a long and proud history of hacking. Really, I mean, you could make the argument that the sort of smart continuous glucose monitoring that happens now wouldn't have happened at all were it not for hackers who said, I can do this better. I'm sick of doing this. There has to be a better way to do this. The sort of artificial pancreas that have been developed independently have been superior, like frequently, to the stuff that's been developed from the medical industry. So the CGM environment is a great example because it shows you what the power of hacking there can be. What's nice about glucose monitoring and insulin administration is it's relatively straightforward. Like your glucose goes up, you want to give them more insulin, stuff like that. So the feedback loops aren't too crazy.
Yeah.
So there's opportunity for people who aren't as sort of medically minded to get in there. But that said, to look forward, I think there will always be a hacker community sort of leading when it comes to new applications of medical devices. We've seen hackers, even before there's medical devices, in the microbiome community, right? People have been doing biome hacking for years now, right? Just with ingestibles and sending their stool off for analysis, right? There's already that sort of ethic, that ethos there. And that ethos, I think, exists in many other places where sort of medicine is starting to get into. So I think whatever device companies, whatever device startups are looking to make inroads there, I think it would be great to use that, because these people have a lot of, honestly, they have a lot of data, a lot of experience already, and any effort to involve them, would be helpful.
Absolutely. No, I love that. And I think this example also shows potentially the need. I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts, actually. The need for is faster the better word, or a faster turnover between, version 1 of medical device compared to patient needs or evolved needs. And usually, from version 1 of a commercialized device, more often than not, kind of stays at version 1 because they're also kind of monopolizing that medical device, and so there isn't an incentive, business-wise, to compete and develop and improve that device, which actually kind of leaves patients frustrated. So yeah. So maybe also there's a call for action there too.
The issue there, I think, by and large, is regulatory issues, right? Because it takes time for device approval to happen. It costs a lot of money, and so medical device firms have ingested, a fair bit of time and money into a given version of something, of X. And so they want to recoup that investment before they go and start going through the regulatory process again, the approval process again for version 2. And I think you hit upon a area there. Like there's a open space there where some of the hacker community can fall in, right? The trick's going to be liability, right? The company is going to have to say, hey, we're interested in what you've learned so far in your whatever, your artificial pancreas 2.0, 3.0, all right? But we don't want to be liable for you messing around with our machine, what this does to you. A fine line needs to be walked there between liability and the value of that information. That said, I think the value of the information is high enough that I am hopeful. I hope that a forward-thinking company is willing to undertake that risk, or they have able to have their lawyers have the people sign off on that risk enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, the benefit to the end user is that their knowledge can get to other people faster. The benefit of the company is they can de-risk their next version of the product, right? They have collaborators out there essentially that can help them de-risk. They're essentially testing what the next version is going to be and helping them develop that. People who are doing active testing. And maybe I'm naive, but I see that as a positive thing. If I were sitting in a executive boardroom for a medical device company, I would love to have that kind of stuff going on.
No, this is great. I want to, just given the time, I always feel like we're touching the surface with all my invited speakers, and I wish I had more time. But I'd love to hear about kind of what led you here. I know your data-centric research kind of has been funded and supported by DARPA, and just to name a few. How did you enter this kind of this very important and timely intersection of life science, biological data, bioinformatics with security and digital biosecurity?
Sure. So BioBright, the company I work for now, was basically born out of a DARPA grant about 5.5 years ago. The concern there, and then and still ongoing now, is that data communication between in biological workflows is not secure. So you can think about a biomanufacturing process. You're making vaccines, for example. You're making tons of vaccines now, and you have these big, reactors or big, big manufacturing workflows that take data in from multiple instruments along the way, send it to somewhere central, and then process that data to say, hey, this is going well, it's not going well, we need to tweak this or adjust that. That data process, that data transmission process has classically not been secure, or at least not secure enough. And obviously that's an area now that holds much interest to governments because of vaccine diplomacy, just the centrality of vaccine production and bioproduction in general to the power of a nation. The stance of a nation, in no small part is related to their ability to produce medicines for their populace or to react to whatever contagions comes down the road and produce a response to that. So biomanufacturing, a nation's biomanufacturing capabilities are becoming more attractive politically, but also to adversaries. All right. So BioBright, through its government work, has been working with large manufacturers and small manufacturers to try to secure those processes, secure the data transmission in those processes. What's interesting is that a lot of the instrumentation, I'm being very roundabout here, but I'm getting to it. A lot of the instrumentation used in biomanufacturing, stuff like chemistry analyzers, stuff like incubators, is also used in healthcare. These are the same machines, the same manufacturers, Siemens, Roche. And so it's no small stretch to see where the kind of vulnerabilities that exist in the biomanufacturing system may also exist in healthcare. And in fact, if you start to look anywhere within healthcare, whether you're interested in medical devices, industrial control systems, laboratory equipment, you see vulnerabilities, and you see ways for people to not just affect those individual areas, but have access to the greater network as a whole. Mm-hmm. So the same sort of power grid attacks that happen to the Ukraine, can happen to a hospital. The same sort of obviously ransomware that happens on the outside in other industries can and has happened in hospitals. The parallels are all there. So my interest, again, being a physician, is in those vulnerabilities and how to better defend against that. And so,
yeah,
go ahead,
because now we're talking about health implications, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and again, as technology just penetrates more and more into healthcare, into medicine, from all angles, you're ingesting it, it's radiating you, it's measuring your lab values and whatnot. It's controlling, the pumps that give you medicine. It's controlling, the defibrillator that's in your chest. As we get more and more effective by technology and medicine, there's just more attack surface area, and security has not caught up yet. And so I'm trying to yell from the tower, say, hey, this is something to worry about here. And people are starting to listen. For better or for worse, COVID has been a wake-up call, and all the ransomware has been a wake-up call to security in general, in healthcare. And I think people are starting to listen, fortunately.
They're starting to realize the impact. No, thank you, Ed. Yeah, I think you're a great example, actually, especially being a physician, really recognizing the importance of this. I think is outstanding. So you're definitely at the forefront, and I hope your shout and your attention kind of reaches more physicians in this space.
Thank you. I don't want to be at the forefront. It's lonely up here, so I need more of your people to come out and shout with me.
Yes, hopefully participants of this hackathon as well will join our efforts. Right, so thanks again, Ed. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We've had some brilliant takeaway messages, really focusing on the systems, the environment, and how it creates a larger attack footprint, and how it's important to really change and shift your mindset as a designer, as an innovator, and really putting our red team or our red hats on to understand multiple, including misuses of our devices. So everyone who's joined us today, take notes from Ed today from BioBright. I know you're halfway through your designs for your applications in the hackathon. Make sure that security is a huge part of that. 1 week to go, and I'll see you soon. Thanks again for joining. Thanks again, Ed.
My pleasure. Thank you, Mariam.